The UFC is making genetic copies of Ilia Topuria as the first step in Operation Matador Homunculus. I can't wait to have 5 of these guys in every division. Isn't this awesome? And guess what? They are genetically engineered to never ask for a raise or negotiate their contracts.
Hey guys, Flounderstruck here, and I just got back from the underground lab beneath the UFCPI, and I have to say that Operation Matador Homunculus is an absolute success. It is all systems go, all cylinders are firing. We have completely copied Ilia Topuria and made several replications of him. One is an Argentinian by the name of Kevin Vallejos, and he's fighting this Saturday, and it will be an absolute treat. Now, the side effect is that you're gonna have to bear a Hyunsung Park main event and I guess a Neil Magny fight among some other no offense to everybody other than Kevin Vallejos and Danny Silva, I guess, but there is some slop. There is a Felipe Bunes fight. There is a Treshawn Gore fight. There is an Andre Polaev fight, but there is a Kevin Vallejos fight. Now, a lot of people have been calling him Ilia Topuria 2.0, and I probably just agree. I mean, 2.0 comes with the implication that he is a updated version. I don't think there's much of an update between him and Topuria. I think he's kind of just Ilia Topuria, but maybe a little bit less of, oh, I hate to say like the X factor or whatever, but Kevin Vallejos at the moment probably carries less of the asterisks that I think make Topuria so great. He's only 23 at the moment. I don't think he's anywhere near as financially wealthy or well off as Topuria is, or even was in the beginning of his UFC career, just given that the fact that Topuria was like a name and already and had like these businesses and stuff. So I think in a way, there's also a lot of room for improvement for Kevin Vallejos, and we may see him improve throughout his UFC career more than we will see Ilia Topuria improve throughout his UFC career. We have no idea what Kevin Vallejos is going to look like when he's 6 UFC fights in and he has his like bat cave like Topuria has, where he enters a hyperbaric chamber every morning and gets fed like protein shakes and Brian Johnson supplements and stimulants and shit. But I'm really excited to see all of that, and I'm excited to see this fight. I think he's awesome. Now, when it comes to how he fights like Ilia Topuria, fortunately, it's pretty straightforward to break down. He's not much different. No, I'm sure there's somebody who can be super nitpicky about certain things he does, and there absolutely are differences between Vallejos and Topuria. But to get to the similarities first, because that's more interesting, and because the title and all of the extra tidbits I'm going to be doing are all about how they're the same person, I probably should talk about the similarities first. Vallejos is a heavy-handed, sort of wide stance boxer who really picks his shots. He not plods in an insulting way, but he does pressure very slowly, sort of lolling his head back and forth the way Topuria does, like always in perpetual motion in one way or another. He'll be marching somebody down or moving so slowly he could be even standing still, but he will always be moving his head. And when he throws, his head is always off the center line. Now, that's not super interesting, so I should probably talk about how, how he just knocks people the fuck out. And he does. And it's awesome. In his last fight against Sung Choi, who showed, like, I guess a lot of problems that Ilia Topuria also, in a way, saw in his debut, where he's just sort of a shorter guy with a lower stance fighting a much taller guy who fights with a very tall range. Kevin Vallejos just shut his lights out completely. Now, I do think Sung Choi is probably just like the flicker of a lighter compared to the bright shining sun that is Yusuf Salal at the moment. But it's already funny to see sort of the UFC comparisons in their career trajectory. However, Ilia Topuria did not have a major setback in the loss to Jean Silva that Kevin Vallejos did. And frankly, most of the hype isn't coming from Vallejos' first UFC performance or his second contender series fight that got him into the UFC. or like any random regional fights. It's almost entirely just his fight with John Silva. The fact that he was able to be super competitive with John Silva in John Silva's UFC, or sorry, Dana White Contender Series UFC contract earning performance is what makes people so excited, right? Now, there are some caveats to this fight, and it's something worth going through. Kevin Vallejos at the time was 21 years old when he was fighting John Silva. And John Silva, I think, was 26. And I would say, like, that's a pretty big gap. That is, frankly, the biggest 5 year gap next to what a 30-year-old UFC fighter versus a 35-year-old UFC fighter would look like. If you understand when I talk about like vitality and experience and where people are at in their careers, like if you compare a 27-year-old and a like a 32-year-old, that's not really that crazy. But 21 and 26 is huge. Dude, I'm 21. So like while it is a loss, I think there's a lot of positives you can take away from that fight. And that's what people have been doing. That's why he's so highly rated at the moment. When you look at the fight, it's so hard to describe. It was back and forth in volume, right? It was back and forth in like on paper moments, but it felt pretty clear who was winning the fight. Now, I do think the first round went to Vallejos. He was pressuring John Silva really well. John Silva hadn't really landed anything major, and Vallejos was just throwing really hard in these big low kicks. Again, in the same way Ilia Topuria does, where without really like disguising the low kick or doing anything to set it up, even like the first strike of the fight, he will throw a hard as fuck low kick, which is sort of nuts. Because that's like a terrible thing to do for a lot of other fighters. That's how Giannis Gomori, for example, got knocked out by Peyton Talbot. I think that happened, like, I don't know if it was last card or the card before that, some dude got caught, again, just starting a fight by throwing a naked low kick. I think it's a really bad thing to do because the low kick, when you throw it hard and you commit to it, it puts you kind of out of position unless you land it in a way that, like, off balances the guy, right? If he checks it, that sucks. I mean, it already sucks to deal with getting a kick checked immediately into a fight, but it also just puts you so out of position, like where your leg is, and somebody could just throw right over the top. There's a reason so many guys take the first round off and they start slow and they find their range, is because getting punished for making like a big power move or whatever in the beginning of a fight is something that happens to a lot of people frequently, and even in sparring. And so they'll sort of learn to take 10%, 20%, 30% off of their shots, even their kicks. Kevin Vallejos and Ilia Topuria do not care about that whatsoever. They will start a fight and they will just slam a low kick into your leg. And it's really funny to watch because they neither of them throw much at all when it comes to the volume of like body kicks or head kicks. And you'd think for a guy like John Silva, who's so fast, who is 100% in the first 5 seconds of the fight, and who has caught people off of throwing kicks before, you think John Silva would be able to like get more value off of that, but he's not. And I'm not really sure what it is. Maybe it's just because when you think of Vallejos, and I guess in turn when you think of Topuria, right? Because Topuria has been getting away with the low kicks his entire career. It could just be that because they're just a boxing threat or whatever, you don't worry about the low kicks. And I guess that sounds like basic to say, right? Like, oh, Alexander Gustafsson's a striker. You don't worry about the takedown. That's not necessarily what I mean, right? I don't mean like you're not going to think about it. I mean, you're not going to treat it like a threat. So therefore, even when it happens, even if you acknowledge it, you're just not going to give it the credit that it deserves. Because I think the kicking game has done wonders for Topuria. I think he was able to find great success with it against somebody like Holloway. I think Holloway slowed down a lot, and Topuria was able to catch him in those moments that he did catch him in because Holloway's movement was hindered. He was significantly slower, and he was moving awkwardly. And moving awkwardly when you're against the cage, against a finisher, is really scary, right? So I think it also gives Kevin Vallejos the same benefits that it gives Topuria, where one, because they're both boxers, right? It's not given like the respect that they frankly need, and which means one, right? You get the free points. You're just getting free kicks off and whatnot. But two, oh my god, it was a huge yawn. Two, it's just easily setting up for the finishing moments. And that's why both these guys are great finishers. Now, against John Silva, he wasn't able to get that finish, but there is a reason for that. So, like I said in that first round, right, he's throwing those hard low kicks, and that's frankly what is winning him that round. It was pretty low output. And I'm not sure why, because, well, actually, I mean, I know why, right? But it's, I don't know why. It's sort of like a lot of the pressuring moments were dictated by John Silva in that fight. You'll notice that a lot in John Silva's fights. He has managed to aura farm his way to completely controlling the ring however he wants to move around. Like he could be moving on the back foot and you'd kind of still feel like he's winning in like in the footwork battle or in whatever he's doing. He could be against the cage and you kind of get this feeling like, oh my god, what's he gonna do next? Um, that's sort of a neat value that being unpredictable and being a little scary provides, is that even when the opponent should be comfortable, they probably aren't. And so even in the beginning when John Silva was backing up and he's circling and he's really close to the cage, Vallejos was doing a decent job, trying to cut him off. I think that's another right Topuria comparison is the cage cutting. But John Silva was just able to fire back, and even if he was missing, the threat of his power was just dissuading Vallejos from trying to close in. The thing that I guess makes him maybe not Topuria is that Vallejos isn't going to look for a finish unless he hurts you first, which is funny, but that's how this works, right? With Topuria, he'll hurt somebody and he'll back off. I feel like he has a really good judge of himself and his own finishing capabilities, but there are times he's swung for the fences against guys that weren't necessarily even that hurt. He just has that much confidence in his power. I don't think Vallejos necessarily has the same, I guess, confidence in his own finishing abilities. He plays very safe, even safer than Topuria does in some moments. Now, I don't mean he does everything safer. I just mean he intends to play safer, right? So he won't try to finish John Silva in the first round without doing damage to him first. So in the first round, it was, right, John Silva skirting on the edge. He'd throw a power shot, but it wouldn't really land cleanly. Vallejos would maybe get Silva to shell up for a second, and he'd throw like a shot to the body, but most of the combination would miss, and then he'd follow up with a leg kick. What I really like, though, is the following up shots with kicks. We all know Topuria doesn't throw body kicks or head kicks. That is the thing that people talk about in regards to his fighting style and what makes it so strange, other than just the obvious of his punching and his punching mechanics and whatnot. It's that Topuria only throws his low kicks, the only kicks he throws, just sort of nakedly, without much setup, sort of just as a way to pester people and just accumulate like these hindering body damages, body fatigues, right, that slow people down and let him finish them. Vallejos is also like 90% punching, but he will occasionally throw a combination and then say John Silva skirts off to one side and skates away or whatever. Vallejos will like end his combination, and while like 90 degrees away from Silva, we'll just end it with like a body kick or something. And well, he didn't do it a lot. It was really nice to see. It was actually really cool to see because it's so basic, and his boxing is already doing 90% of the work. So that is, I guess, something you could say that Topuria could very well do. Like, I know that Topuria is a champion and whatnot, but that doesn't mean he can't improve, right? Just because he's at the top of the world doesn't mean there aren't even little ways he could get better or maybe take advantage of his skills. And a way you can take advantage of your skills as a boxer is by, not changing your game up and becoming like a teat merchant or like some kind of kickboxer or whatever. But you can do the work with your hands, get somebody to shell up, and then you just throw a kick in. It's that simple. Regardless, in round two, John Silva came out super differently. He was, oh my god, yawning crazy. He was pushing up Vallejos to the fence. He was like actually pressuring him. And Vallejos was standing his ground. John Silva would sort of try to rush in without maybe getting the respect first. And Vallejos would, try to counter with a shot to the body or like an uppercut or something. But nothing would really land super flush. And then John Silva just throws this elbow that is so nice. Like, whenever Vallejos is in the middle of the cage, he will shell sort of like just like in a regular high guard, right? Like you'll see JDM or Pyotr do or Topuria do or whatever. He doesn't really do much with his guard other than that when they're in the open space. So that's like the best time to take advantage of that. And frame like John Silva's doing, like putting his hands around Vallejos' wrist, keeping his high guard stuck, and then using that to like elbow like it's a Wing Chun dummy or something. That's something that Merab and Aljamain Sterling both had a lot of success with doing against Pyotr Yan. Every time Pyotr Yan would high guard, they would grab his arms and then just elbow him around his guard. And John Silva did that like fucking 10 times in the second round, like in the first 2 minutes. And Vallejos would, despite getting really hurt in moments, still keep his composure. There was a point where John Silva's elbowing him straight, like, and then like landing shots around his guard and like hurting him really bad. And Vallejos doesn't, like, he barely looks rocked. It's so weird. He'll be cut. He was cut up from an elbow, which definitely accentuated the that's a word, right? Accentuated. I'm like 90% sure. I'm taking a Googling break right now. Hold on. Yes, that is exactly what I mean. He accentuated the damage he was doing, right? By just having like the visible blood on his face. He, elbowed the cut open and then just was just punching at his face where the wound was, just sort of exploding blood all over his face, making him look maybe more damaged than he was when it comes to his like skin or whatever. But he hurt Vallejos so bad. There was a point he throws a shot around the guard. Vallejos is against the fence, and he just elbows him like directly on the chin. And Vallejos, for a half second, is out. Like, he's really out. He's genuinely unconscious. And it's not like, oh, before he hits the ground, he wakes back up. He wakes back up by the time his head snaps back. Like, by the time John Silva has retracted his elbow, Vallejos is already back up. And he doesn't act like he's rocked. He maintains complete composure. I don't know if it's his instincts or there's something about his brain that is allowing him to immediately just wake up and maintain like his full awareness and senses while he's hurt, but he's doing it perfectly. Maybe he just wasn't I don't even know if there's a way to be concussed, or sorry, be put out without being concussed. But if there was a way, it would look like what happened in that round. But regardless, he clearly still was suffering the effects of the damage. Like, cognitively, he was throwing fine. He was still throwing with great technique, and he was still trying to shell up in all the right ways. But he just was not pressuring John Silva, frankly, from that point onwards. In the second and third round, it was kind of more of the same. Vallejos was getting hurt a lot less in the third round, and he was finding success of his own. But I think after he got hurt, he was really struggling to find ways to press John Silva. And I guess in a way that maybe isn't like, current Topuria or even early UFC career Topuria. I don't think his cage cutting was as good as it could have been. And we'll have to see how his cage cutting is going to look, especially in this fight against Danny Silva, who usually goes 3 rounds because he's got a great chin and great output. Let's see. So I talked about the kicks because I think that's a fun thing to talk about. I talked about the boxing. I guess I can talk more about the boxing, right? Vallejos doesn't jab. I know Topuria does jab, but Topuria doesn't have a crazy output of jabs for a boxer, right? Generally, I think before Topuria, if you're thinking about boxers in MMA, Holloway, right, or honestly, Volk had freaking great hands. I said freaking this time. I didn't say the F word. But Volk had great hands, and so did Holloway. And why can't I think of like more boxers in MMA right now? Like Calvin Kattar. Um, I'm trying to think of like as close to boxing purists as I can get. But the point is, all these guys had great jabs. When you talk about fighters with good boxing, right? Usman had a great jab. George St. Pierre had a great jab. The jab is, every like 90-year-old onk boxing coach is going to tell you about how great the jab is, and every like MMA hardcore guy is going to tell you about how great the jab is. And yet, two guys right now who I'm talking about, and one of them is being considered the best boxer in the UFC in MMA history, doesn't jab anywhere near as often as these other guys. And so you sort of have to think about why that could be. Now, Topuria does jab. Like, I'm not saying he doesn't. I just think it's pretty interesting how often he's finding shots with his rear hand or with, with straights or crosses or hooks or uppercuts. He just, frankly, is a lot more striking diverse than a lot of other boxing guys. And he's relatively low volume for the damage he's doing. It would take Holloway 100 punches to do the damage that Topuria does in 10 because Topuria is just not taking as much sting off of his shots and he's timing his shots better. When you're using your jab constantly, right, which usually would imply that you're initiating exchanges, you aren't super often going to be catching somebody off guard in like the perfect timing that you would if you were playing like a counter-attacking game with somebody like God help me, Andre Fiallo. Why am I thinking of Fiallo? Kevin Vallejos or Topuria, right? Vallejos does the same thing. He will stalk in the way that Topuria does, but he's not jabbing super frequently, and much less than Topuria, less than any boxer I can think of. Instead, he'll throw with his straight, he'll throw hooks, he'll initiate with hooks, a lot, but he will generally try to pressure you and just make you uncomfortable, put you against the fence, so then you will throw to try and get off the fence. I talked about how Whitaker can sometimes be predictable in that regard, where when he's backed up against the fence, he either throws or he completely like switches stances and commits to like running away from the cage. People get uncomfortable when their back is against the fence, even elite guys. It's not fun for most people, unless you're like Adesanya or Ian Gary. You don't really want to be against the fence. So Kevin Vallejos can rely on that, and instead of maybe forcing awkward exchanges where it's harder to land as cleanly, he will just push you up against the fence. You will try to swing back, and then that's when you're completely open and exposed for him to pull and counter or catch and counter. Again, like Topuria does, they're very similar. Um, hmm. So that's a good one to talk about. I think it's really what makes them super interesting, and also what makes them so similar is how often they're throwing straight hands and uppercuts and body shots, and just things that, frankly, things that just aren't jabs. Let's see. What's another? What is another? I'm gonna pause the recording for a second and think about another thing Vallejos does. Oh, I guess I can talk about finishing sequences and like similarities. And I don't. Sometimes I'll say finishing sequences. I don't necessarily just mean times where he finished the fight, but sort of just the actions he takes and his decision making when people are hurt. He really likes when people shell up because he will find shots around the guard. He has a lot of confidence in that. Guys will get hurt and they will sort of just do the same things over and over again, shelling up. Holy shit, fourth yawn, maybe. And I don't know, they sort of like, people expect better results than they get very often when they shell up. They will put their hands in front of their head and hunch over. And I get that they're, obviously hurt really bad, and so it's not the best decision they could make. But when you're not fighting back and you're not putting back offense, you are such a such a target for a good boxer, for somebody who can throw around the guard, throw to the body. And Vallejos is great at that. He will get you hunched over with a body shot and then throw to the head. And the second you're guarding your head, he will throw back to the body. And then he will throw 3 uppercuts because it's fun to do, and then he will kill you. It's awesome. I love this guy, dude. Another thing about his fight with John Silva, I guess we can sort of get into like the flaws part or whatever. He can be low output at times. I guess that's sort of what I mean when I talk about how he and Topuria don't jab. They just feel, I don't know. It's like they feel low output for how much time they're spending walking the guy down and like making their opponent too scared to throw back. They they really wait and they're very patient, and it's very much the right thing to do. But it's so interesting to watch, and sometimes it can be really stressful because you're like, when's he gonna throw back? Like I remember watching Topuria Holloway and just or Topuria Volkanovski even, where Volkanovski would throw one, two, three, four, five punches, and Topuria would, he'd slip them or take them really well, roll with them. But I'm like, when is he gonna throw back? When is he gonna throw back? And he just knows. He knows better than anybody when the right time to throw back is. And if Kevin Vallejos is like that and continues to work those kinds of skills, and which he will absolutely get them through experience, then it'll be awesome to see. But against John Silva, right, where somebody's not just teeing off. John Silva doesn't really tee off on somebody. He kind of just starches them, right? John Silva isn't a Holloway. He's not gonna throw like 100 jabs, and then the commentary goes, "Oh my God, he's beating him up right. He's beating up bad. He's beating him up bad right now, man." John Silva throws like 3 punches, and then your like nose is like wrapped around your face. um, with your teeth like sticking up in 100 different directions, sort of like a piano keyboard going doo doo doo. John Silva beats people up comically, and so the threat that he poses to Kevin Vallejos in that fight is different than the threat that almost anybody else is going to pose against Kevin Vallejos. He's a really scary guy, but he was able to use the fact that he was scary to great success. Kevin Vallejos lost his composure in a lot of ways, which is funny because I just said he kept his composure. He keeps his composure when he's hurt, but he lost in that fight what I think made him good. He was not pressuring forward. He sort of got more reliant on trying to find like the big punch and whatnot, which is I guess fair when you're like down around and you got hurt bad. But I don't think looking for the one big punch is what you do against John Silva. I think even if you're down 2 rounds against John Silva and he's trying to kill you, you still have to do all of the other things first before you can land on him, because that's the unfortunate reality of fighting somebody who's elite. Is that if you're fighting Volkanovski and you're down 4 rounds, you don't close your eyes and swing. If you really want to win, if you really want to win, you still have to jab and you still have to feint and you still have to be good, be smart with your footwork, fight for like your foot positioning, or inside foot positioning or outside foot positioning or whatever you need to do in that matchup. And you have to do 100 steps first, and it'll feel like you're gonna lose. But that's just the requirement. That's just the barrier for entry in an elite competition. And I feel like Vallejos has the makings for an elite fighter, but he needs to work on his decision making when he's down, because he fights great when he's up. But I guess we haven't really seen him. We've not seen him lose a round and then win the next one. Yeah, yeah, there we go. That's what I could have shortened a lot of this to. We've not seen him lose the first round and then win the next one. He's always starting really good and continuing to do good, or he's doing good and then the other guy makes adjustments. And I guess because we haven't, he doesn't really have enough footage because he's starching everybody. The only example of the guy making adjustments is an elite guy in John Silva. So that's pretty high praise, and that's a pretty strong implication that Kevin Playhouse is going to go really far, most likely. His defense can be. I'm going to go out on a limb and avoid saying the word poor, but I don't like what I'm seeing sometimes against John Silva. And he's like blocking kicks with one hand, which is really scary, right? Um, I forget who it is. I think it's Lucas Tracy goes on about how Topuria has the answer to all kicks with how like tight his guard is or whatever. Um, Kevin Vallejo's guards kicks like head kicks and shit like full power with like his wrist. That's like terrifying. He's gonna like break his hand. I thought his hand was broken against John Silva in like the second or third round. He actually did pay for it really bad. In the third round, John Silva threw hell head kick, and even though Vallejos reacted to it. You know, he's rarely getting hit super cleanly. He's blocking a lot of these punches, even when they're like in bad positions. But he couldn't absorb it just with his wrist. It absolutely rocked him bad. Um, the other thing about his defensive reactions or whatever is that he kind of does like a tall man defense thing that I talked about. He Philly shells against the cage, and it's cool and it does really work sometimes, but his lead hand is nowhere to be seen, or at least was nowhere to be seen against John Silva. And that's really scary. He's doing the high guard when he's out in open space, and that's why um what's the word? I prefaced by saying in open space every time I was talking about Vallejos' high guard, is because whenever I saw him against the cage, he was doing one thing, and he was just Philly shelling with his rear hand, you know, in front of his face, you know, trying to catch punches like you'll see like Chris Curtis do or whatever. But his lead hand was nowhere to be seen, and he was just eating shots to that side over and over and over again. And after getting, you know, rocked from that side, his next reaction is to duck down, and then he just ducks down straight into a knee, and then he gets elbowed, and it's like really bad. And I I know John Silva's a great finisher, so surviving at all in that exchange is a good thing. But it does worry me a little bit, especially in this matchup against Danny Silva, because I'm 31 minutes in now, and I've not even talked about Danny Silva. Danny Silva is awesome, and oh my god, I'm so high on this guy. His Contender Series fight against Angel Pacheco is, in my opinion, a better performance than I have ever seen Kevin Vallejos have. Which sounds kind of nuts, right? But I think it just was. Maybe, I don't know if objectively is the right wording, because you could say to get somebody out of there in the first round is better than going to a decision with them. But I think Danny Silva looked that good. He dropped Pacheco so many times. He rocked him so many times. He's throwing elbows, he's throwing knees, he's throwing around the guard. He's head kicks, leg kicks, body kicks, great body shots, hooks, uppercuts. I mean, he's literally doing everything. And he looked great. And the unfortunate thing is, like, half those tools that I mentioned are things that Kevin Vallejos has struggled against. And I don't know. I think Danny Silva really could make him pay for it. Um, I guess I'm not sure at now if I should, like, how much I should talk about this matchup, given that I'll probably do a full card breakdown. But I kind of just want to talk about it now. Maybe this will be like the detailed breakdown of this fight, and then I'll make it a bit shorter and reference it when I do the full card breakdown. But Danny Silva is really good, and his UFC record maybe wouldn't tell you that. He's 2-0, which is good, right? But they're both split decisions, which is really funny. However, they're split decisions against guys who are sneaky good and kind of just like underrated matchups, right? They're both like pretty tough fights for everybody. Like Josh Kulabau is, I think, cut from the UFC, unfortunately, with a 3-4 record. However, the out of his 4 losses, 2 were split decision losses. One was to Lerone Murphy, and the other was to Jalen Turner, who he came in on really short notice up a weight class against. He had a draw with Charles Jourdain. He beat Melsik Bagdasarian, who I think is good, and he beat Sung Choi, who I think was at a time good, and then started getting hurt really bad. And then when it comes to Lucas Almeida is 2-3 in the UFC, which again doesn't sound good, but his losses are Fili, Sabatini, and Silva, who are all great. And his win is against Timmy Kwamba, and low key Timmy Kwamba's not that bad. So that's another thing to think about, is that like the featherweight division it's really stacked. Even in these unranked guys, even these guys who are getting cut or on the verge of getting cut, they're still tough fights for a lot of the division. Josh Kulabau is so fast and so awkward and such a neat style, and also a really funny build. And Lucas Almeida is like 7 feet tall at featherweight. Not actually, but he's really tall. And not just that, but he fights really tall. And so if you are not like going to be wrestling him, it's a really awkward fight, because he's a great striker and he has better defensive reactions than just doing tall man defense. And when you're fighting a tall guy who can do more things than just tall guy defense, it's actually a big problem. And so Danny Silva still beat both of these guys, regardless of how good they are. But I feel like it's worth saying that I don't think either of the split decisions should have even been split decisions. I think he beat both those guys. Not well, soundly, right? It's so hard, right? When it comes to vernacular, like word choice, when you talk about like wins and losses and stuff, there's like this whole thing about like close fights aren't robberies, or competitive fights aren't close fights, or both those fights were really competitive, but I think Danny Silva clearly won them. That's the best wording I can give. And I think both those guys were in ways when you think about, I guess, the asterisks or whatever, like their height and reach and frame and their styles. I think they're both both more difficult fights stylistically for Danny Silva than Kevin Vallejos is. It's just that Kevin Vallejos has a great chin, has great cardio, and hits really hard, and like has great timing, and always throws back. Right? He frankly just makes better decisions in the cage than I think Almeida and Josh Culibao do. However, I think there's just a lot of things Danny Silva can do to have success against Vallejos. And one of them is taking advantage of Vallejos' defensive reactions, right? If Vallejos shells, Danny Silva knows what to do against people who shell. Angel Pacheco was shelling and using the I want to call it the Mayweather guard, but the Philly shell. Whenever Pacheco would be against the fence, doing his Philly shell with his lead hand really low and his rear hand like right above his chin or whatever, Danny Silva would cut an angle like crazy, like prime Cub Swanson like angle cutting, and he would cut a 90-degree angle and then just completely like hit him right around his guard, like on the other side where he's like not even blocking, and drop him. It was great. He was throwing so many elbows in like all of those clinch exchanges. And they're the same kinds of elbows that John Silva was landing on. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just, there's a lot of similarities. And Danny Silva does have his own attributes, right? Traits, X factors. I hate the word X factor. It's just so overused. I grew up on Spike TV, so I say X factor. But Danny Silva has a lot of things going for him that I think also would give problems to Kevin Vallejos. He is tall as hell. He has a long reach. He has a great chin. He's really high output, good power, and his cardio is amazing. I don't know if Kevin Vallejos can put him out, and if he can't put him out, and we don't know what his adjustments look like, and he's fighting a guy who has a lot of those like range and reach, reach and range advantages. It's going to be really interesting, and it's going to be a lot closer than I think the odds are going to suggest. Because I don't think either guy's getting put away. I get that Danny Silva, dude, yeah, Danny Silva's never like been finished or like even looked hurt ever in his UFC career or in any of his MMA fights I've seen. It's really, really hard to picture Kevin Vallejos finishing him. Like I'm sure Ilia Topuria would finish Danny Silva, I guess, but Kevin Vallejos doesn't like trap people against the fence and throw shots so hard that he's like falling over. I guess that's the other thing when I talk about like fighting safe or whatever, is that Vallejos is fighting with as much power as his desire to be smart will allow him to. He's not going to tumble over himself at any point. Even if a guy was like rocked terribly and like spinning around in circles like a cartoon character, Vallejos isn't gonna like charge up his ultimate move like he's Vinicius Oliveira or John Silva. Vallejos is probably just gonna land whatever he thinks is gonna like hurt without sacrificing exposure. And therefore I don't think he necessarily has the same capacity to just put somebody flat out like Topuria has. I think Vallejos would need to change things about his game, frankly. Like almost like fundamental things about his game to be able to be like that. So yeah, the fight's gonna be close. And if a fight's gonna be close, just inherently, I don't know why. I don't know why Kevin Vallejos is like what -600 or whatever, -470. I don't even talk about odds that much, but this one is worth talking about the odds over. It's gonna be really close. It's gonna be really competitive. There's no shot in hell I eat my words on this. I'm serious. I will not eat my words. I kind of want to pick Danny Silva to win. It's hard because frankly, I think in some ways Danny Silva's Contender Series performance was still a better performance than against Culibao or against Lucas Almeida. But I think it's I think the height difference, it really benefits him. I think Danny Silva looks really good against guys who are short. Like his one loss is a majority decision to a guy who is 6 foot at featherweight. And that is crazy if you ask me. So, yeah. Oh no, I'm gonna title this video about Kevin Vallejos. And I think Kevin Vallejos is probably gonna go much farther than Danny Silva will, because I don't think Danny Silva has anywhere near the finishing instincts or yeah, finishing instincts. I don't think he's anywhere near the finishing power. Um and I honestly just don't think he has the swagger that Kevin Vallejos has. I guess I'm gonna withhold my prediction until I do a little bit more tape study for the like full card breakdown or like my final prediction. But it's hard to not lean Danny Silva like for all those things I'm talking about. Oh, you know what? No, Kevin Vallejos wins. Danny Silva is having competitive fights with Lucas Almeida and Josh Kulibau. And Lucas Almeida has been finished a few times. Josh Kulibau has been finished as well. I guess only once in his career, but I don't know. I don't know. Danny Silva couldn't finish Angel Pacheco, and Angel Pacheco is 0-1 in the UFC with his one loss by KO. What? Ooh. Hold on. Tapology made a mistake. Tapology actually made a huge mistake. It says here that Angel Pacheco's one loss in the UFC is by KO, but his only loss is to Callan Lochran, and that's by decision. But regardless, sorry. I think Danny Silva looks good against guys that are chinny in hindsight. Oh no. Oh no, this is a nightmare. This fight is a nightmare. I have no idea what I'm supposed to think right now. It's so difficult, and this is something I also want to talk about with Topuria. That'll probably touch on a little bit right now, and then go into detail, another time when I talk about Topuria or prospects in general or another prospect. But it's so matchmaking specific. Danny Silva, if Danny Silva fought Cam Teague and Sungwoo Choi, I think he'd also like look like a fucking monster, frankly. So, dude, right? And then it's like, okay, what if Kevin Vallejos had to fight Lucas Almeida and Josh Kulibau? How would he look? Oh, it's so weird. Oh, what a weird sport. Oh my god, I'm just playing pretend. I'm playing dolls. I'm mashing two superheroes into each other and I'm going, dude, Batman beat up this guy and but I have no idea what's going to happen. It's so late. I'm going to make a funny thumbnail and funny title for this video and then I'm going to go to bed. But the last thing I want to say. Oh, you know what? No. Okay, I'm saying this at the end of the video, but this is going to be also maybe towards. No, wait, do I do that? No. I'm not worrying about that. Okay, I made a Discord server, so if you want to talk about fights and stuff, I'm gonna always be talking about fights and stuff. I also welcome you guys to talk in the comments and stuff. I try to reply to every comment. I think it's really cool, and I guess it's weird to ask for subscribers, but like if you enjoy talking about fights, I want to start doing like live streams and stuff where I get to talk about it. I think that'd be awesome. And frankly, I think I'm smart about this stuff. I can give a unique look. I mean, I'm literally freestyling after watching like three Kevin Vallejos fights, and I think I did a decent job coming up with some interesting stuff to think about. If I pull up my Google Docs about this fight, all I wrote is just my jokes for like my intro to the video to get audience retention. The only thing I wrote is that Vallejos has heavy hands, a wide stance, and he's slowly but perpetually moving his head, which is true. But regardless, good night, guys. See you later.